Hello, and welcome to the Matriarchy. Hey, Lisa, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, Kath. How's it going with you?
Pretty good. I'm pretty excited about our next guest. This is the second guest that found us. So thank you, Deanne, for joining the Matriarchy here. Yeah, I'm going to pass it to you, Lisa, and you can introduce her.
We are very excited to have Deanne Austin on today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is a proud Detroiter and dedicated to social justice, advocating focused on equitable education, environmental sustainability, and transportation justice. Her community organizing work, which has been featured in the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, and the New York Times, includes advancing transit reform, promoting food security, and supporting land and water stewardship. A former ambassador for Detroit's Future Cities Land and Water Program, she earned the 2019 Most Impactful Award for her leadership in green stormwater infrastructure outreach. Very interested in that. In 2024, she received the Annette Rainwater Organizer of the Year Award from the African American Leadership Institute. Austin also holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Michigan State University and a master's in social justice from Marygrove College. She has served Detroit communities as an academic interventionist, instructional coach, and now as a political organizer for Mothering Justice, where she champions voting rights, paid leave, affordable childcare, and reproductive justice. She is skilled in DEIB and justice practices, curriculum development, issue based campaigns, and community engagement. And she brings extensive experience in both virtual and in person facilitation. And outside of her organizing work, she likes biking through Detroit and cheering on the Pistons. Welcome,
Woo!
Deanne. Thank you
Woo!
for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great on this really good November day. Doing really great and glad to be with you both.
Thank you. And
We're
thank you
so
for
glad to
reaching
have
out.
you.
Yes. And so let's just kick it off and get right into it. What I guess just to learn a little bit about who you are and where you come from. Like who are the women in your life that had, an influence on you? And also how did you find your voice? Like how did you become the person that you are?
Ooh, oh my goodness. That's a good question. First I would say that I'm always a child of God. I'm always a, native Detroiter, proud, born and raised, right? And then I
Uh-huh.
always say that I feel like I lived in East Lansing for 5 years when I went to Michigan State. So, of
Mm,
course, Lansing has my heart in that aspect as well, but
right.
just homegrown. And I want to always give props to my mother. This is no discredit to my father or the men in my family, but my mom, she was a single mom. She raised myself and my younger brother and I, and she came from a lineage of strong women.
Mm,
She was she came and grew up in a family around a lot of girls. So my aunts were very instrumental in raising me, and
Mm,
post her death, really came and really saw where I needed help. There was a big age gap between her and her sisters. So I have an auntie grandma, as I say,
Yeah.
who really raised me from the age of maybe like 2 to about 8 years old until
Right.
I went to live with my mom full time. And so women have always really inspired me. I kind of found my voice, but I always say I'm still evolving and finding it.
Mm,
I was a shy,
love that.
soft-spoken little girl. I grew up in the church, and so sometimes thinking of the church and thinking about patriarchy, women are often taught to silence themselves, right? You don't speak, you stay in your
right.
place, you talk when you are told, and so I had to learn a lot of these systems, especially as I grew up. I went to college, I had lived experience, and I had to really work on developing my voice. As you mentioned, I went to school for journalism. So I thought I would always be on broadcast TV or broadcast radio. And I really kind of secretly hated my voice, but I knew my voice was powerful, right? And so whether I didn't, end up in the news. I went into teaching for a couple of years, and one of my students will always say, Miss Austin, you had the most boring teacher voice I ever heard. And so, but I took that as a compliment
Yes.
because I sound like a teacher to them. So I really learned to nurture my voice, cultivate my voice, and really be proud of it and stand up,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that really worked in the work that I do now, especially being in the community.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Sounds like you grew up in a matriarchy, really.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Again, we learn so much about these systems. The world was really set up for men, but I really loved, especially being in a Black women led family. I had to learn to be unapologetic sometimes. People are not always going to like what I have to say. No matter what I say, some people can misconstrue that as being angry or too passionate or too loud. And, no matter what kind of woman you are or, what you identify as a woman, we are often told it's too much, you're too emotional. And as
Mhm.
we're watching, it's not so much us. We can use that kind of passion to really use change and spark change.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. But my family really, really pushed that, in me.
All right, I have to ask because I did a little research. How did you get the nickname Puritan Princess?
Okay, this is okay. So this is it's a running joke between my grandma and our mutual best friend who's he's close to my age, but there were I don't want to say odd pair, but there was this big age gap between them. And so when I came back from state, I rode the CATA, which is a bus system in Lansing. So
Mhm.
I'm the millennial that does not drive, so I rely heavily on public transit. And so my grandma and my mom were really trying to teach me the Detroit routes, right? Which seemed like, even though I had come from Detroit, I really didn't know which way the Plymouth went, the Dexter went. And I had
Mm.
a job then in manufacturing that took 3 buses.
Oh.
And so, yes, yes. And
That's
so
quite a
my
commute.
grandma was was teaching me the bus route. And I think because I'm also a big Disney fan, a Disney princess, she was like, she tried to make it cool for me. Mind you, I'm like 23, 24. But her and our best friend David was like, oh, you could be the Puritan princess because I get my like edge from Puritan. And so I own it. I own it. And I really, really love that, that Puritan princess. And when people see me in the community, my friends, my coworkers, it gained steam and people called me the
Mm.
Puritan princess.
That's not so Puritan is a street, is that right?
Yes,
Um,
it's like a long street that encompasses a community. So Puritan Avenue can
oh.
range many, many, many streets geographically.
So it doesn't have anything to do with, like, purity or anything, it's a street.
No, no, but I take it, as that kind of native Detroiter, yeah, there's something pure about us in our neighborhood. We're
Oh, I like
Mhm.
resilient.
that.
We've seen it all. We have a wide range of
Yeah.
communities. So I like that pureness.
That really speaks to your roots, like to your
Mhm.
strong like connection. After college, you came back and you're doing all this work.
So you decided to study journalism, which is definitely, using your voice, right? So what sparked you to get into community organizing and social justice?
It really was the women in my life. My grandmother
Yeah.
told me to speak about things that directly impacted me. And so when I'm out talking about civic engagement, I know people like, oh, Deanne, I really don't want to get into politics, but there's this issue I really want to stand up for. And so I
Mm,
use that as something my grandma told me. So as the millennial that didn't drive, I graduated from state at the height of a recession.
mm,
It was a housing crisis. My mother had lost her home. And so I
mm,
couldn't find a job. And so I had to take a job. But because of the limitations economically in Detroit, I found a job all the way in Livonia. So I had to
Mm.
take 3 buses while still
mm.
finishing out my master's in social justice. And so I was really stumped. And my professor, Elena Harada, said, Deanne, you are living something that you experience of taking the bus, taking public transportation. I
Mm.
spent the majority of my day getting to work, then working, then going to sleep, and then having to redo it. And so that really got me into transit organizing. And so that really pushed me to really advocate for public transit, whether it was reliability, affordability. It really pushed me because I was directly impacted by that. And
Yeah.
so that led to many other things. When I got into transportation, I want to say, oh, even though I live in the Motor City and no, we don't need to get rid of every car, this helps environmental wise. And so I got into Detroit Future City, learning about sustainability and stormwater and green water
Mm.
infrastructure. And then after, when I left working at the manufacturing plant in Livonia, my friend, who was also she was a powerful female principal in Detroit, Dr. Jamita Lewis, she said, hey, you have a degree, even though it's not an education, why don't you go into academic intervention, which was helping that
Mm.
master teacher, right, do small intervention with students. And I did that for a couple of years, and that really changed my view of what else was going on in the world. My
Mm.
students were also impacted by transportation. A lot of them were, surfing from house to house. So we have to look at these child poverty gaps in our systems, and
Yeah.
students were dealing with so much than what they were prepared for. And so while I was an academic interventionist, I was also doing dual work with DPSCD in the government affairs office, which was super important because people don't realize that policy is politics. And, students, especially in marginalized communities, they are often left with uneven policy decisions. And so I really wanted to advocate them. Even when I shut down my lights from the classroom, I still wanted to work. So I thought that was very, very important.
Mm.
After I left the classroom, in the evening, to be a liaison between
Got it.
families, students, and the community.
So the first issue you started with was transportation, and then like that just opened up so many other doors that it's really poverty and access to getting out of poverty is systemic, right? It's like all these
Hmm.
different pieces. So is that kind of how it bound together for you?
Yes, it was a natural growth progression for me. Again, everybody's like, please focus on one thing. I applied for a job once, and an executive director of a nonprofit looked at my resume and said, oh, you have all these skills, but you've kind of been everywhere. And I felt a certain way about that because I think we as women, we have learned to pivot,
Mhm.
and we are not a monolith. Like, we can have a variety of issues that we want to tackle and professions. And so, I didn't hop to job from job, but what I call that is that I diversify my skill set, because you have to do what brings you passion. Yes, we know we need money, but at the end of the day, there's people making millions and millions of money and they're unhappy. And so I get joy when I'm out in the community, whether that's been in education, whether that's been in the environment, whether that's been in transit. There's such a wild variety of issues that we can tackle. And so doing that really opened my eyes to the importance of social justice, not just taking
Mm.
classes, but knowing how important it is to fight for these issues.
Yeah,
Yes,
what's
yes.
interesting to me is how, these things aren't in a vacuum, right? You can have transportation issues and housing issues and then, environmental justice issues and it's like, you know, you really should be celebrated for having all this experience, not penalized for
Yes, you
diversifying,
should.
right? You
Mhm.
see how it all weaves together.
If you do work in a public school setting, you know that educating the kids is just one part of it. They're dealing with so many different layered things. I'm dealing with students who are coming to class like, Miss Austin, my bus never came. Or, Miss Austin, I'm a little bit hungry. I missed lunch, and me providing my own snacks for them to get through the
Mhm.
day. So you realize that, yes, students are learning, but there's so many different social economic layers to them getting that
Yeah.
proper education.
Yeah. So I'd like to dive a little deeper into the transportation issue because this is an issue that I think about a lot, and I think you already brought it up that it's not only an issue of moving people, but it's also an issue environmentally. So you have said that transportation justice is a civil right. Yes.
Mhm.
Can you explain what that means, like in practice?
Yes. Basically, transit is a civil right. It's where we need to get our basic needs. So, as a teacher, this is how our students get to school. If
Mm.
you are sick and you need to go to the doctor, it is how, whether you're elderly, no matter what age you are, you need to get to the hospital. And so,
Mm.
transit came up in every other social justice that I would advocate for. So there is this
Interesting.
narrative that Detroit is poor, we lack this, we don't have this, but actually we're resource rich, we are connection poor. So when you lack connection to getting people to these resources, well, that's a bigger, larger systematic issue. And so in my transit fight, I really got involved with an org called Transportation Writers United. I do sit on the board with them as I was volunteering. And so I thought about how important wise, not just in Detroit, but Metro Detroit,
Yeah.
how we connect people to resources.
Yeah.
And so that's super important. I love that transit is not a partisan issue, right? It's
Yeah.
not a black or white issue. And so transit, it just
Yeah.
goes across spectrums on the people who really need it. So transit is a civil right. We needed it. It's to help our basic needs. So it's
Absolutely.
super important. And
Yeah.
if you've noticed, whether it's been at the state level or even in Detroit, whether it's elections, more elected officials are talking about the importance of expanding transit. So again, that piece of where I had to take 3 buses to get to Livonia, some cities opted out and did not want to expand transit. And so fighting for it made people see, okay, we want everybody to come here because I want them to come work for me, and that boosts economic
Yeah.
stability. And so I think I would just became enamored about how people were getting around. Now, mind you, I'm more a part of the equitable part because I really want it on time and affordable.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
I do love this innovative transit and mobility conversation. That gets me going. I was an ambassador for Mogo Bike Share, which was a nonprofit bike sharing system in
Yeah.
Detroit, which sprouted to
Nice.
Metro Detroit. And so I
Yeah.
think having these conversations about how people are moving are important because we want them to move financially up, physically up. So I love it all. I love all these conversations.
Living where we live too, you mentioned we're in the Motor City, right? And it's like, I don't think it's a coincidence that we have poor public transport when historically, like back in the day, they were putting obstacles in place so that you
Yeah.
couldn't expand. I'm in Rochester, so it's only about 45 minutes from Detroit. We used to have a rail line and I think it was, the Fords or whoever, like barons of the day, were like, shut that down. We want people to buy cars, right? And so it is a bipartisan issue, but I think also people are turning it into the haves and have-nots. Like you have a car and like or you don't, and that really is like, if you live in other cities around the world, you don't have to have a car, and it's kind of nice, that you can just get on a
That's right.
subway, right, to get where you need to go. Yeah, that's interesting. Like historically, where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, the automotive industry definitely lobbied against public transportation for many years. And so we seem to see some improvement. Over this, and like even like in our county, in Oakland County now, it did go countywide. So cities cannot opt out anymore, which that was a huge problem. You'd have this little piece over there and this little piece over here, and now all cities are involved, and it's better. Still has a long way to go, I would say. And so how do you feel about Detroit? Have you seen some, like, since you've been advocating, have you seen some improvements, or what are some areas that still need to improve?
Any improvement is better than none. And so
Yeah.
I've been in this fight for over a decade, and it just, again, it's a multi-layered issue.
Yeah.
So for instance, I think Detroit bus drivers just got an increase from the current mayor, Mike Duggan, and we were, actively calling him and fighting for this because they needed to be paid like the suburban counterparts, right? Because we
Mm.
want
Mm.
good bus drivers to retain them and keep them so that they can get us going to where we need to be. So I'm always pushing for affordability and reliability. There are some buses that only come once, you know, an hour. Like when I took that Plymouth bus to Livonia, and let's say that bus was shut down, and so it was just super hard to get back and forth. And so elected officials, or the people who have these positions, they work for us. They work for the public. And so it's important to come to these meetings and speak out and share your opinion, or you're just a part of the process, but you don't have a voice. So the more that we work together collectively as a community, we can push for these issues for change. So it has gotten better. And I always say transit is now sexy, right? Who rides the bus? Because let's face it, the bus conversations has always been a little bit elitist and class,
Mm.
and it concerns of like, oh, you're poor, you ride the bus. But yes, people who are low income need to ride the bus, but let's think of the college student who can't afford a car. Car insurance is high across Michigan, so whether you're a professional or whether you just want to ride the bus recreationally, it is your right to be able to move. And so that's super important to me. So I have seen some great conversations happening, and I'm looking forward to, I know here in Detroit we have a new mayor elect who's always been vocal about transit. We have some Detroit City Council members coming in who have been pushing it on, the campaign trail. So this conversation is getting more and more broad. And I really love that. No matter
Yeah.
who you are, or no matter what you look like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And there is the environmental part of it too. So even for people who maybe, can afford the car or whatever, there's environmental reasons to move
Hmm.
people in groups, right?
Yes.
Instead of
Yeah.
everybody out driving their car around. And we
Hmm.
see this in other cities. Like, I mean, I grew up in the Chicago area, and from the suburbs, I could take the train into work. We just don't have that here. So we have a long way to go, I think. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. But you just mentioned something else I wanted to touch on. Let's talk about Mayor Sheffield.
Hmm.
Is she elected or so,
Well,
or
yep, yep. She's Mayor-elect
mayor? So
Sheffield
she hasn't been
until she
sworn in.
transitions in January. We still
January.
have a current mayor, but she's
Okay.
coming on in there and she's building her transition team. So yes, and
Yeah.
I kind of grew up with her, and I've known her for a long time, and
Oh.
she's a year younger than I, and so I've really seen this rise of a powerful woman. Right,
Mhm.
the first woman elected to Detroit mayor office is really, really impressive.
Yay. It
Yes.
is
Mhm.
very impressive. I
Yes,
mean,
yes. Mhm.
Super
I think the
exciting.
whole nation is looking at Detroit right now.
Yes, it is. And I'm like,
Yeah.
let's look at some of, last year was a hard year for some of us, right? I mean, even looking at, from Hillary to then Vice President Kamala, we know women have been overqualified,
Mhm.
and we're constantly having to prove ourselves, right? Oh,
Yeah.
get this amount of education. Wait your turn. Wait,
Yeah.
keep doing the work, and then we'll accept you. And then there's people who, and I love, my forever former first lady, Michelle Obama, when she says, "Oh, they're not ready. We're not ready." And that kind of broke my heart a bit
That
Yeah.
broke my heart
because,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
some people
Same.
aren't, but some of us are.
Yeah.
And I think
I'm ready.
data and
I'm ready. I'm
yes,
more than ready.
data and research shows that women-led cities and communities
They do.
do way far more better than, our counterparts. So just watching the rise of women, I think is super important. No matter what you look like, whether black, white, whatever your background is, there's power in our voices. And
Mhm.
I really pay attention to these times. I know people feel like, oh, it's so divisive, but this is where I think women from across every span really need to
Yeah.
find their voice and use up. Yeah.
We agree.
Yeah. Well, and Detroit's ready, right? Detroit's
Yeah,
ready.
That that
I've
is
been,
It's
so
I
amazing.
think so.
exciting. That's
Mhm.
exciting. I
Yes.
mean, so, did you work with her at all at it? Because you said you've
So
known
I
her.
I did. I was so busy because I also work in policy and voter education, but I
Mm.
was able to volunteer a few times and really see, again, a woman who has been doing the work, right? She was the youngest, person elected to city council.
Oh, I
So
didn't
she's
know.
constantly had to prove herself despite everything that has pushed against her.
Oh,
And even watching her rise now, we saw the big margin gap between her and her opponent, and she knocked every door. She still went to forums. I mean, and I was just wondering, like, how is she doing it all? And she would just really, really, because she really believed in the city of Detroit.
yeah.
She really loved what she was doing. And so, again, it's just been amazing to watch her grow. And we're going to be rooting for her because if you have
Yeah.
watched the temperament against women,
Mhm.
especially mayors or governor, or in
Mhm.
elected roles, we know that there's a target kind of on their back, right,
Yeah.
from a certain power entity. And so we really want to support them all we can because we know we're living in changing times. We're not going to have the resources that maybe we had about 4 years ago. So it's not just going to take the woman, it's going to
Mm.
take her village and her community to help
Yeah.
build it. It's not there's no I in team. And so I'm really excited about Mary because that's what she embodies. It's going to take all of us.
Yeah. I'm impressed that you're already thinking, that you're thinking that way, and being prepared is the most important thing. And knowing that that's a possibility, that those attacks are gonna come, is really,
Mhm.
half the battle, I think. So
Yes.
I think
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
can get people to rally around her,
Yeah.
and she already has. Like, she just has a
Yeah.
lot of people in her corner. So
Mhm.
that's
And
it's
women have we've been fighting our whole lives. I know people are like, these are new times. For some of us, no, this is a cakewalk because we've seen in the past what has come up against us.
we
And
just didn't
so,
talk about it, right?
yes, we
Like,
didn't. So
and
yeah.
I don't think
Mhm.
there's a woman in this country, possibly this world, that hasn't had to fight their own battles, and because they're a woman, right?
Mhm.
We didn't all talk about it. We didn't have
No.
podcasts back,
No, it was
all sharing our
taboo,
stories.
shut up, do the cooking, have the babies,
Yeah,
and now, we're on a roll, right?
we are.
We're on a roll. Mhm.
We
Well, and
are.
maybe people were talking about it, but people weren't listening. The powers that
Maybe.
Mhm.
be
That's a
weren't
good
Maybe.
listening.
That's a good
that's a
point.
good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very
Yeah. Now,
possible. I was telling Kathy I was on TikTok last night. I went down a rabbit hole of like content, feminist women, matriarchal content, and I was loving it. I'm like, yes, it's a very exciting time in Detroit, and
Yes.
everybody loves going down there now. And I guess that kind of leads us into my next question. Detroit's, we've seen the downtown blossom, but there's been criticism that, it's not really reaching out to the full population. Is that some of the work that you do? Do you work within the neighborhoods, and what are you seeing?
Yes, so I will always be a forever teacher, but there has been this talk about the resurgence. And I want to share something. Downtown Detroit, it's kind of the heartbeat. So
Yeah.
I believe this kind of sibling rivalry of this and versus them versus us can be a little bit dangerous. Now downtown Detroit is. I'm sorry, it's developed. It's there. I'm glad it came back. That's a good thing. But now we sprinkle it out to the neighborhoods because your
yeah,
heartbeat, it needs the blood flowing from the vessels, and that's us. And
Yeah.
so that's where that Puritan princess comes in because our neighborhoods are lacking. But I think again, that's where it takes community leaders
Mhm.
that come in. I mean, I've seen some wonderful work by some educators who are starting, nonprofits and city gardens and educational systems, and we're really taking up that big fight to help teach our young people and take care of our communities where
Mm.
we lack. So I think that Detroit's real emergence is going to come from the neighborhood. It's going to come from these communities who
yeah.
haven't had a fair fight yet, but are here. And that's why I'm really excited about Mary Elect Sheffield because I know she knows it's going to be instrumental that the neighborhoods
Yeah.
grow and develop. And so
Yes.
that's super important. But it takes our neighbor down the street. It takes us,
Yeah.
it takes that teenager, right? And so it really takes a group of people to get involved.
Well, and I think it takes all of us. Like it's gotta, sprawl to the suburbs too, right? We need to expand the net, right? Expand the village
Yes.
that we're taking care of each other.
And I know, there's a lot of people that come from the suburbs. They love going to a Red Wings game or a Pistons game like I do. But I know that there, are women just like you both who says, "Oh, a pottery class?" Or, this
No.
is a conversation
Yeah.
that, is about transportation or education. It sparks something in them like it did me many years ago. And they say, "Oh, even though I don't live in Detroit, let me branch out to the community because it
Mm.
takes all of us,
Mm. Yeah.
and I go out to Ferndale or I go out to Royal Oak and vice versa. I always say Michiganders, we're like siblings. We might, or cousins, right? We might live in a different house, but we're still family. And so, again, we really need to take up that mantle and just band together and build with each other.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, I'm gonna go back to some of your justice work. So you worked on land and water sustainability. What is one misconception people have about environmental justice in urban communities?
Hmm.
Or can you
I
even
think,
back up and explain what environmental justice entails too? Like how would
wow,
you define it?
I often think of as a Black woman thinking about environmental injustice, right? Black and brown people are often affected, oh my gosh, beyond repair of some of, the environmental injustice that has happened to us, right? We are living, whether there's dust, whether our young children grow with asthma.
Mm.
I was a preemie who had asthma, whether
Yeah.
it's breathing, whether it's health implications, right? So I think that a lot of people say, oh, well, environmental justice has it's kind of been whitewashed, right? When I go to a lot of environmental events, there's not a lot of people that look like me. And when I do see them, I get excited because I love this work. And I want to say there's a misconception when we think about the environment, right? Especially when we're little. Oh, we're tree huggers, don't litter, and we really care. But people often think, oh, I have to have a degree in the environmental sciences, and that makes me an expert. And that's, that can help, right? You are educated on some of these practices, but I get involved. I might not know every fancy word or the correct jargon, but I'm noticing, hey, these 100-year storms are happening of every other day. And my neighbor's house and my house constantly floods and is getting worse. And so people are able to look at the effects of climate change. And so I really love that Black and brown communities are really, really advocating for what we need in terms of, hey, our air quality is bad. Let's try to, speak out against this plant that's built up that's constantly killing us. And so I think this is a conversation that, again, is impacted, especially being a Black woman of color in our communities. But it takes other communities to step in and say, you're right. And how can we help you and fight against this?
Mhm.
Interesting. Yeah. So, what are some tangible ways for people outside of Detroit to offer help in any of these subjects?
You know what? I think it could be anything. I think the great thing of having access, if you do, I know a lot of people do not have, access to the internet, but we're learning a lot now based on our phone. Now, we know some of that can be misinformation,
Yeah.
but push yourself to go to a library and read about what's going on in the news. I think, data centers, whether, no matter the city or
Mm,
where it is, again, it's likely to impact Black and brown communities more, but you might live near that community. Speak out against it, right? Every voice counts. It could be, again, going to a city council meeting
mhm.
or, a water authority meeting. And don't get discouraged because a lot of people go and they're like, oh, this is not my field. I don't feel as educated. But the more that you ask questions and you get around other people, that's how you learn. That's
Yeah.
community learning. And so there's an issue that is, affecting you. A lot of people, again, do have asthma, and it's not just Detroit, but you're noticing that
Yeah.
the health implications are just growing and growing. This is something that it rings in your ear a lot. So, read the news and, read
Mhm.
as much as you can and be a part of the process. I mean, I teach people to get civically engaged on things that they're curious about. They might not know all the things, but there's a buzzword in their ear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there
Yeah.
an organization that you want to plug?
Yes, I really love Detroit Future City because that's how I got involved. The Sierra Club is great, and I'm learning that because the transportation system ties to the environmental side, that a lot of these things interconnect. So I've been meeting amazing people. Again, Transportation Writers United is one of them. I know Moses fights for transit as well, and you learn about other things, especially the environment. And so there's many chapters. Go to a meeting, and meet people. I know everybody, some people are shy. Obviously, I'm not, but I encourage them. That's how you build community because we're starting to live, although there's many people around us, many people are isolated. And we're talking about the dangers of people staying to themselves, especially our young people who may have not the community when we went to college or we went to school or we went to church or we went to wherever. So building community, especially in these spaces, is super important. So again, I love Detroit Future City because they also tackle the importance of housing. So I'm learning learning as well. I'm getting into zoning and the importance of how zoning
Mm.
can help, ordinance can help as we talk about affordable housing, because we know not in just in Detroit or Metro Detroit, we're living in a national housing crisis.
Mm.
And so these are the things that gets my wheels going. I think it gets other people's wheels going too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I loved what you said that you don't have to be an expert to get involved, right? Like,
Mhm.
I mean, I think I fell into that trap some years ago. It's like, well, I don't know enough. Like, nobody wants to like, talk to me about this. But you're 100% correct. You just, get in there and you read and you talk to people and advocate, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's key.
I mean,
Yeah.
think about the women that raised us, right? I have my grandmother, ODN. I really wish I would have went to get a degree in social work,
Mm.
but she was really doing social work before it was labeled that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so a lot of the women that we know, they didn't have these degrees, but they've been child rearing and teaching, as much as they can. They didn't know all the things, but they learned and they pushed us to learn. So that's why I say it's a multi system of us building together and teaching. And while I'm not a mom yet, the time is ticking. I still find a way to nurture. I'm still fine, whether that was my
Yeah.
students or, the young people in my community, I'm still momming in my
Yeah.
own way. So I think it's gonna take all of us to really moms are the best teacher, right? Whether that's been good lessons or bad lessons.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, maybe.
yeah, yeah. So, we
Sometimes
take
you
from
need
them.
it, you know?
Yeah, we learned about lived experience, and I know when I graduated, I think that's why I got humbled finding a job. Like I graduated, oh, I'm gonna find this job, I'm gonna make all this money. Now, I was a journalism major, so I knew I was never gonna be rich. But I came home to all these things. My mom lost her house, and and
Mhm.
then dealing with not being financially secure, and her health going down, and she eventually passed. Like I really had to navigate these spaces and learn
Mm.
on my own, right? That I often say I love Michigan State, but I learned kind of more things on Puritan than I have at State sometimes.
Yeah.
But it took some of those journal classes and poli sci classes to lead me here. And so I think that's super important.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the work that you do with voting.
Mhm.
Can you talk more about that? Is it registration drives or is it just getting out the vote, like making sure people actually like just
Mhm.
vote, right? Because there's so much untapped power.
Yes, I also work with an amazing organization called Mothering Justice, and so we have a wide variety of things that we fight for. Whether that was affordable child care, Black maternal health, reproductive justice, and basic needs. And as somebody who's like a social justice connoisseur, basic needs encompasses a lot of issues, and
Yeah.
so we know that Black and Brown women we are not invited to the table. We often don't have a seat. And so that requires us to be more civically engaged. And what does that mean? Making sure that we are registered to vote and that we're doing voter education. And I think in these times, if people are paying attention, voting rights are under attack these days. And so during the work is super, super important. Again, whether it's getting them registered to vote or again doing voter engagement, because people often tell people, okay, we need you to vote, but some of them are young. Like I have family members who call me, okay, what's a city council person at large? So a lot of that is
Mm.
voter education to
Education.
keep that engagement going. And we know that in Detroit, the amount of people, while it has been a slight increase, we need more people, registering to vote and voting. And I want to talk a little bit about voter apathy. We sometimes blame the people for not voting, right? We vote for elected officials hoping that they have our best interests at heart. And so your politician shouldn't be your Beyonce, right? And but you want to have shared values in that elected official or that candidate that will best likely align. So do I want to hug and love all my elected officials? No, but there's some across the aisle that says, hey, transportation is important, or let's talk about how housing taxes are just hurting our people in our community. So I think this is where we start to have these larger conversations, just of like not only going to the ballot box, but making informed, educated decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're voting, you're not marrying them.
Mhm.
You know?
Yes.
Do you come across, a lot of barriers to people voting? I know, like you mentioned, like voting rights are under attack. Can you speak to that from your perspective, what you see kind of on the ground? Are there voter ID laws that are getting in the way? Or I don't know, can you just kind of pull away some of those layers of the confusion or misinformation?
Yes, I'm speaking for myself as an individual citizen, but I was always taught the importance of voting. And I'm noticing now that people have a large distrust of politicians, and I can't blame them, right? And then they're seeing things not trickle down to them. So when I am door knocking or phone banking, people, oh, that sounds nice. I'm trying to feed my kid. I just lost my job. So they're tackling, do I pay my light bill? Do I pay DTE? Or do I feed my kid? Or do I pay my child care or my health insurance? And so we're seeing people tackle these things like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we know that inflation is here. And so these are kind of the issues that we got to get back to, because people feel so disengaged in voting because they're like, well, what does that mean for me? Like, or
Yeah.
they'll come out and vote for a presidential election, which we know is important, but really local level stuff like who's picking up your trash can?
Yeah.
There's a millage on your child's school. There's so many
Yeah.
issues that is just basic local level. And so I think
Yeah.
that's super important. But what I really love about these times, especially looking at the past election, whether it was New York or Detroit, it was basic messaging, right? Make transportation free. And so I think when voters learn more about that, they're willing to go to the ballot box. Now, I also want to get into something there. As an able bodied person, there's an amount of people who are disabled, and, there's barriers to them
Yeah.
Yeah.
voting. And so that's where transportation comes back in. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't have cars, right? And I love this conversation. I know Detroit did this where DDOT, and it also may have been Smart, who said, hey, it's going to be free bus rides to get to the polls. And I think that cuts down on a barrier there. So that's super important, looking at the different populations who need to vote. And then again, looking at different ballot initiatives. Like if you saw something that says Citizens to Protect Democracy, you think, hey, that sounds good, right?
Right.
But
Right.
we know that kind of, I know, right, that language of the other side who's making it hard to vote. So, women who might have gotten married and don't have their maiden name anymore, or having a passport. Do you know how expensive having a passport is? I just got mine at 39 earlier this year. And so really a passport to vote. And so looking at, the Voting Act and how across
Mhm.
the country there's little stuff we're dicing and dicing it of how so far we fought, right? 50 years of fighting for this can be dismantled in a week, right? And so when we talk about these things, again, not just voting for a person, but looking at the mechanics behind it and the
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah, that's really important. Do you get involved with like teaching civics at all? Because I feel like across all economic strata, there's just not enough understanding how our
Mhm.
systems work. Do you work in that area at all?
So when I was working with Detroit Public Schools Community District as an I was able to create kind of a civic program for
Mm.
17 to 18-year olds, 17-year olds that were about to be able to vote, and just talking about the importance. So I know financial literacy classes
Mm.
are popping up high, but I
Yeah,
also think we need to bring back civics, right? We already
think
know the
so.
threats to our history classes that's being taught, right, and pulled back, especially as we look at the Department of Education. It's again going to take kitchen teaching, right? You're going to have to really teach your kids
Yeah,
when they come home from school, or, your niece, your nephew, the young people. It really is going to take larger conversations, because looking at the educational system, that piece of civics is super important.
yeah.
Mhm.
And having conversations early with your kids. And people say, "Oh, I don't do politics." That's a certain privilege that I never had, right? I was born a black woman. My body and my being is political. And again, thinking of policy. And so we need to start talking to our kids, no matter who they are, about the importance of voting, the threats that are happening to voting, because this is something that's not going away.
I
Yeah.
agree. It's more than just one person sitting in the White House. There's a
Yes.
Yes.
whole organized force out there. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah. Um Okay, so you received the Annette Rainwater Organizer of the Year award. So what led to that? What were you working on?
Well, first, I want to just highlight Annette Rainwater. She was a woman who was involved in civic, engagement. I, didn't know much about her. Really, I started researching a little bit about her, but what made me get the award was, it was an election year last year, and we don't do this work. Especially when we call ourselves organizers for awards. You don't do there's some people who have been doing this, they died in the fight, right? You don't get accolades. Some people do, but we don't do that. We love this work. And so whether it's been knocking doors or phone banking or holding, conversations, doing the voter registration drives, I really pushed myself last year to
Mm.
really learn more and be more civically engaged and show my community about the importance of voting. I'm an elder millennial. I'll be 40 in February, but I participated with a group called Register Her. And a lot of
Hmm.
the participants were younger women, and it was their first time voting. And they were able to take
Cool.
that back to college campuses and, really, really, really push the importance. And I often tell people, you know, politics is, I'm a big Harry Potter fan. It's not a Quidditch match, Oh, my team didn't win, and we're red and we're blue. These are policies that affect everyone. And
Yeah.
so while the election didn't go the way, that some of us wanted, that shouldn't discourage you. We have to keep believing in democracy, right? And so
Yes.
I really love that, especially young women, they're getting involved with these things. They're not scared. They're asking the questions and they're like, "Oh, let me go to school." Or, they're doing these things. And so that makes me super, super happy and proud of the future.
Yeah, that's wonderful work, and thank you for doing that. And
Mhm.
I think, I mean, we saw this last election just this month that young women drove a lot of the wins that we saw. Like, so that
Mhm.
so good work.
Yes, we have the power,
Yeah,
and I think
we
that's super, super important, especially when we look at the landscape of, like, I often tell, women and girls, this is not the time to be quiet. You, as a
Yes,
little girl, in
yes,
church, who raised her hand, "Can I talk? Can I talk?"
yeah,
No, take that anger is passion, and take it no matter what you look like. Fight for others because it's going to take all of us. I need, you two to fight with me.
yes,
I need Kathy and you to fight with me, and help me in rooms that I'm not in. And so I really think that's super important.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Take up space, and if you don't vote, there's no incentive for elected leaders to do what you want them to do. Right?
Yes,
True.
yes.
Like,
That's really
Mm-hmm.
true. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And I think working in policy, there's a disconnect of, like, the politicians. And I don't know if you've ever been to a lobby day, because that's how a lot of people get involved. They
yeah,
might not know what's going on, so they
yeah,
go, to Lansing or even DC, and they go to the Capitol and they meet all these elected officials and they get super intimidated. And I always tell
mm,
them, hey, they're here for us. They represent us.
yeah,
I was in a room and somebody said, "Oh, nobody from Lansing is coming to save us." And so I think it takes us to put pressure on our elected officials to let them know, this we did not vote for you to do what you want. You serve us, right? We are your
yeah.
constituency. And so that's super important.
Well, they
that's
need to
really
hear from their constituents,
they do,
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
they do,
Like those
and
phone
hopefully
calls
they
and everything,
listen.
they add up, right? They
They
add up
do.
because
I
a lot of
mean,
people don't call.
yeah,
So when someone
they
does,
don't.
they listen,
Yeah. And
I
we're
think.
seeing
I
those
hope.
more and more, right? Call your senator, call your representative. And people say, "Oh, I'm just leaving a voicemail or somebody's just taking my call." But no, they have to
That
look at that
matters.
data. And guess what?
Yeah,
Election time is coming up. So this is an incentive for them to do what we need, right?
yeah,
Here are issues that we're talking about. Do not take away SNAP. Do not, take away my Medicaid. It's putting pressure on them to know, hey, look at what your constituents and the people are saying. And so they do have to look at that, especially when they're running for reelection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they do record it. They do, record how many calls they get on an issue, and they know that for every one person that calls, there's X amount of people out there who agree with that person, and they
Yes.
take that into account. They do.
Mhm.
Okay. So, having said that, what are some strategies that you use to build trust in these communities? Because what you're saying, I hear you saying, is that they've lost, or they don't trust as much anymore. So, what are
Mhm.
some strategies that you found work to, like, build that trust back?
It's the importance of relationship building.
Yes.
And not just relationship building, but sustaining that relationship, right? So, with
Mhm.
any relationship, we know you need to have constant communication, being present. And someone told me something super important. There's a difference between being visible and being present. And so,
Mm,
it takes community, right? I
Mhm.
think it takes not just environmental groups, but education groups. Start out locally. So go to something locally and be a part of it. There was an event that they had was it was like a pottery class, but it was also talking about civic engagement and issues that
oh, I love
are
that.
Huh.
meaningful to us. And I thought that was really cool, right? So
Yeah.
not just talking, but building the sense of family. I know in my community, food is super important to us. So potluck style is super important. So not only come, but we're gonna have food there. So
Good.
that's part of your relationship building and
Uh-huh.
building and coalition building and again building a multiverse of
Yeah.
different bases. These big movements across the world, across history, didn't just take place by one single person. It took one person, a group, and then another group, right? So,
Uh-huh.
as a Black woman, I know the importance that my ancestors paved the way for civil rights. But guess what? It took people that did not look like us to help. And so, again, when you
Yeah.
think of coalition building and building community, that's super important if you want to strategize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And because it's
Yeah,
so important
absolutely.
not to just show up when you want the vote, right? You gotta
Hmm.
be there in the in between,
Yeah.
I suppose, and like
Yes.
to be serious to build the
Hmm.
relationship. Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
notice, like, I think there's some representatives in Congress, members who aren't going to their town halls. And we're seeing that a lot over Instagram. And people are upset because how
Yeah.
do you represent me and you're not here, but you're on a big spender party? You need to
Yeah.
be here to
Yes.
support and listen to our issues. And it separates the real from the fake.
Yep.
So, while again, politicians aren't celebrities, there are some good legislators that I go, wow, they're doing it. Thank you for showing up. It could be a coat drive, a food drive, or
Mm.
even on the House floor presenting a bill to, protect water shutoffs. Like we often hear more so about the bad politicians than the good ones. And so I think that's an important conversation to
Yeah.
have as well.
That, that's a good
Yeah.
point. You're right. We don't lift up the good ones enough. I agree. We'll have to think about that, Kath.
Well, it's true. As humans, we have negativity bias, right? And
We
so,
do.
but you gotta
Yeah.
point out what's going well, who's helping. It's a lot easier to tear down than it is to build,
Yeah.
But I think you nailed it when it's all about building relationships, building coalitions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe getting out of your comfort zone a little bit and going to your neighbors too and seeing what they need and like how you can kind of work together and take care of each other. So
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and we're seeing these right in these the current marches and the No Kings protests. We're as it
mm,
just grew like from the last one to the latest one. We're noticing that more and more people who are not involved and I'm not don't do politics. Well, wait a minute, you didn't do politics, but I see you out there with a poster. Because guess what? It's hurting everybody. It's
it
affecting
is.
everyone. And so are we're making allies, with each other because we have a shared interest of things not being right and fighting for it. That's the great part of
yeah,
our democracy, right? Democracy is so fragile, and in these times, it's like, oh, why keep going? Now, do I have
yeah,
to balance myself and shut off my phone sometimes? Yes, but I'm gonna rest that night and I'm gonna get back to going doing the work the next day.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah,
You do need to rest because
Yes.
otherwise you burn out.
Yeah, you do
Absolutely.
burn out,
yeah.
especially in
Right.
this day and age. I've been having breaking news since I was 11. And
There's so much breaking news.
so yes, and let's talk about mental health, the psyche. And so people
Yeah.
can say, "Oh, I need a break," right? But guess what? I'm getting back tomorrow. reading
Yeah.
about that bill, going to that meeting, and keeping it pushing for the fight.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. It's not easy. It's
Mhm.
it's it's hard, and it as you said, it's not to get rich. It's not you're doing it because it's your
Yes.
passion and that you care about people. Um, I guess I'd be remiss to ask, like, have you ever considered running for office?
I have, and I always see in my very political tone, we'll see what happens next.
Well
We'll see what
done.
happens.
Well done, Deanne.
Well,
Um,
the world could use more people like you
Mhm. Oh,
yeah,
thank
and for
you.
their
very
neighbors.
much
Yeah.
Yes.
so.
And that's what
So,
I believe, whether I run for office or whatever happens, I want to build other Deannes, or
yeah,
other Kathys or other
yeah,
so it's super,
yeah,
super, super important that we really develop one another, right? Like I consider
Mhm.
myself a leader, but we're all leaders. And I think that that's super, as you all talk about finding your voice. And I think that's
mm,
instrumental in the growth of the future, right? I'm somebody that after I left DPSCD, as an academic interventionist, I was an instructional coach with City Year, and they were 18 to like 26-year-olds, maybe taking a gap year. And
mhm,
so, whether it was leadership development, I always push them to get out of their comfort zone. And
yeah.
so, whether that was outside the classroom, whether they wanted to go in education, or they like, oh, I want to go to law school, I want to start a nonprofit. So that's how we develop the next generation of leaders. Is
Oh,
really,
that's wonderful.
yes,
Yeah, that
developing the
is
youth,
really
investing in the youth.
yeah,
Right.
and I think part of what we're trying to do here is to have this out in the, interwebs, so that, to just show, highlight people like you, so that the younger people can see, look at what you can do, right, as a
Mhm.
woman.
It's
And
possible, and you're showing, you're modeling
you're
how this
modeling.
can
Yeah.
look. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I did want to ask about I love that you said that you're centered in DEI, B, and J, and I know what it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. I have never heard the B before. That was the first time I'd heard the B, and I love that.
Mhm.
And so what does true inclusion look like? Like in when you're working with folks and then in your organizations?
That's a good question. What's so funny when you said DI, like my heart like fluttered a little bit, right? Because what a dangerous word it is. I was just telling someone there's a list of words that are like on the target list of words not to use, and how dangerous this is, right? So
I said
when
DEIB.
yes, yeah, oh, yeah, right, right.
That's not
That
on the
is the
list.
belonging. But when we talk about exclusivity, we are talking about um people who've often again been left out, right?
Yeah.
Diversity is super important. And I love that DEI can be a black guy or a white woman. It was, or, someone with a disability. It's a variety group of people that we want to include that have been left out, to give them opportunities that are normally not accessible to them. And I had to take away certain biases that I had,
Mm,
right? Coming into a culturally different environment, I had to say, okay, this person needs a voice, has their voice, and they need to be heard. And we are human beings. We're going to have conflict, but I
yeah,
think having healthy conversations,
yeah,
having that table and noticing, hey, I don't have a seat. I have my seat. Let me get the next person a seat. So that's why that belonging is super important, because you can bring everybody to the table, right? Have you ever been invited somewhere? You're like, ooh, but you never. Sometimes people don't feel included, or they don't feel like they
yeah,
belong, and
right.
that's that piece of that's where you start to build a relationship and sustain that relationship, and you
Mm,
find a friend or find a new family member, and so that work is not done. They can scrub the letters, they can change it all they want and flip it, right? That we always say they change the messaging. It's the narrative, but we know what this work really means. We're going to
yeah,
find ways to advance it no matter what happens with it. And so I really, really love that. Like the work that I've been doing, it just inspires me harder. I feel like I was never the teenager that, wanted to rebel. But now I'm like, oh, can't do this, can't do this. Mm-mm.
watch me.
Come on,
Watch
girls. We
me.
as women, how many times we said we're gonna snatch this from you? We're not gonna give this to you. Don't do that. Who are you talking to?
What are
We're
you
gonna
talking
find a way to do
about?
it good. So I think all of us
Yeah.
can bring on these practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And you're absolutely right. Once you say to me or most women I know, you can't do that or, yeah, watch me. I that's wonderful. Are there any other items that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
I'm forever learning. There might be another issue that I hop aboard, right? So, I know I was somebody that was unfamiliar with immigration. And so that's something that I want to learn more about. So I always
Mm,
say, let that be a
mm,
teaching tool for us that something is sparking me because we can see that, especially when we look at voting, people kind of went with their best interests. And some of those people are learning, look, oh, I thought this was only going to affect this person. And now it's
right.
bled into what I'm doing. And so that's making everybody getting through all that misinformation to really get to the point. And so, at the end of the day, maybe because I'm just like a true Pisces girl at heart. I'm a lover girl. I believe that there's a bigger hope. We got to have hope. Like democracy is not over. Yes, it's going to be fights. It's going to be
Yeah.
hard. They'll
Yeah.
pull it and take it away from us, but there's the next day. And so my late mother would often say, there's going to be seasons. You're going to have a season of downtime, of good, and there's going to be a season of rich reward too, but you got to do the work. And so I think it's super important that we do that work now. And that's
Yeah.
what women have to do. We've
Yeah.
always got to pivot, we've got to
We do.
diversify our platform. And that's one thing that Gen Z has taught me. Working, with young people, sometimes they go, "Oh, the vibes wasn't there, so I left that job." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, but what do we learn from that?" But learning what doesn't serve you anymore is super important.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
said,
It's true.
I had a season of going blue collar and working at a manufacturing, and then I had a season of working in education. Then now I'm full into policy. So we are very multi-layered in who we are, and so I think that's super important as we talk about equity, right? Because if we are
Yeah.
set on a wide, diverse issues, we're going to be bringing people to the table. We're going to be fighting for people that need to be
Yeah.
fought
Yeah.
for.
That was awesome. I love this
Yeah.
concept of seasons. Your mother is so smart. And I love that you frame it that way because I know I've had many seasons. This is one of
Yes.
my newest ones. But I also believe that yes, we're taking a hit right now. But if you look at the history of humanity and even just this country, like
Mhm.
the pendulum will swing back
Back.
again.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it will.
Yes. God
Um,
willing. We'll do the work so that it does.
we
Yes.
will.
Hopefully
We will. Yeah, it
sooner
doesn't
rather
yeah,
than
Yes.
later.
exactly. We
It
will.
seems like, oh my gosh, housing, immigration, transportation. How do we do it all? But we can do it all. We can do it all.
Sure. That's what women are used to. Multitasking.
Mhm.
Yeah. Gosh, Deanne, it's been a joy having you on here, and you've answered this in many different ways just from your experience, but I'm curious to hear from you in your own words. What does the matriarchy mean to you?
Oh goodness, that is a good question. I think before we can really tackle matriarchy, we have to look at patriarchy. But let me answer your question. Matriarchy to me means a women led movement that includes love, empathy, compassion, leadership, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice to further that movement. So that's what that means to me.
Thank you. That was very, very good. And you have been describing matriarchal concepts this whole interview.
Yeah.
So you are
Since the
definitely
beginning.
centered in it. So thank you. And thank you for all the work that you do. It's
Yeah.
really, really important. And let us know if you decide to run for office.
Okay, I will.
I
I
know.
will.
Check back on
And
that
Well,
I'm
you
so
know,
one.
happy glad I found you and you found me. And like
Yeah.
again,
I
that yes, that's the dreamy girl in me, right? Like you find people that you admire and who are talking about something. That's how we're really going to get to change. Is
it
I
is.
need you, you need me, and we
Yes.
need each other to survive. That's actually a
Absolutely.
song.
Yeah, having the
Absolutely.
conversations. One thing that struck me is that when you're talking about having all these different seasons and having all these different, like your quest for knowledge, I'm just going to say that you would be really good in public office because you need to be a jack of all trades. You
Yeah.
need to understand, all these different issues, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be running for office, but just the way to connect all of these, like you have lived experience because you've been in those shoes.
So
Yeah. Anyway.
if there's anything we can do to help support you, please, please
Yes.
don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh
And
no, no. I
so
have new forever friends, so
that's right.
I'm gonna need you guys in 2026.
Yes,
There
and we're
you
gonna need
go.
you.
Yes.
All right. Take care, Deanne.
Okay, take care you
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
I love her. I
I
love
know
her.
what an
I,
impressive woman.
she is.
So passionate and warm and knowledgeable on all these. I feel like, she pivots, right?
Yeah.
She sees an opportunity and
Yeah.
she grabs it, right? And she learns
Yeah.
from it and she keeps like enriching her own life. She's clearly a person who's very curious, and that really serves her and her community.
She's curious and she cares a lot.
Yeah, and she's doing the work, right? She's a good role model. Um,
Yeah.
I love that she clearly identifies as an elder millennial.
I know.
And
I
I
guess I'm
love
an
that.
elder Gen X.
We're just Gen X. Gen X is just Gen X. We don't need to be elder, Lisa.
I'm just Gen X,
We're just Gen X.
the forgotten generation. The women of Gen X right now are roaring, like, so they're not going to forget us anymore. Yeah, I learned a lot. And I mean, Detroit is a really interesting city. And I think
Yeah,
like learning more about Detroit is interesting for anybody, especially with our first woman mayor.
yeah.
Yes, like that's just I mean that is such a huge huge accomplishment for women and for Mary Sheffield. And it was exciting to hear that Deanne knows Mary and has known her for a long time and has watched her grow. So that was
It's going to
very
be
cool.
exciting to watch that unfold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be so cool.
It's a new
Um
era. It really is a new era. It's going to usher in a new era. And Detroit is she's absolutely right in that Detroit is, flourishing now. It's on lists of tourists. Like I had a friend of mine who she is originally from Detroit, but she got her like friends from other states. She lives out of state. And
yeah.
they did their girls trip in Detroit, right? And there was no
Nice.
lack of things to do. And there's all these
Yeah.
videos that pop up like 10 things to do in Detroit. I'm like, yes, yes, yeah. It's
There's
just it's
so much.
amazing. There's so
Yes.
much to do, and like the perceptions have changed. But until it's still a lot of wealthier people that can access these things. It's like until this can fan out and really like envelop the people of Detroit, we're not there yet.
And to offer
And
them, employment that makes it so they don't have to rob Peter to pay Paul, as she was describing. Like, I think that continues to be an issue is just this economic parity. And so I actually know a lot of like Gen Z people who live in Detroit now, downtown. They're like choosing like suburban people who are moving down there, and they're very expensive apartments in like the downtown area. So it's just interesting that the property values haven't like raised for the rest of the city, but I think they're on their way.
I think it'll take some time, but I think it takes a lot of, because there's still so many forces at work, right? You gotta, you can start with the schools, right? We're underfunding our schools, and if the suburbs
That's a good
sneeze,
point.
the cities are going to catch the
Yeah.
flu. and we're already underfunding all of them. And so, schools is one part, but there's a lot of people still living in poverty. And so I think the needle still moves, and we need more people like Deanne who are doing the work inside the city. But honestly, I think there's a reason she reached out to us too, is because we are speaking to a different population, and to
Mhm.
develop these connections so that it's not people in Detroit working in Detroit, people in the suburbs working in the it's this cross, because now we're going into Detroit, we're eating at the restaurants, we're going to, like, yeah, go Lions, right, like go Pistons. um but it has to be more. I mean, this is an important start, and I think Detroit is on the map in a way that it hasn't been for a long time, but it has to fan out in these smaller connections and relationship buildings, because it still feels very separated to me.
Yeah. I think so too. I think part of that is transportation, right? And I
Yeah.
think I could see why she would definitely want that would be one of her first passions. Um but I do think, and you just touched on it, and she touched on it, is, policy. So
Uh-huh.
much of it is policy driven, and I liked how she said that people forget, that politics, I mean, basically politics is policy.
Uh-huh.
We get caught up in personalities, we get caught up in drama that's
Distractions.
yeah, thank you. Created drama that causes distractions. And she said something that I also thought when I heard that Mayor elect Sheffield won, is like, to have a female mayor, that's new. And so what kind of policy will, a woman lean into that might be different, just because of that nurturing and I'm not saying that men can't nurture. They
Uh-huh.
can. They sometimes choose not to, though. And sometimes women choose not to nurture, so I don't wanna
Yeah.
make it totally like, one or the other, but, it will be interesting to see if having a woman mayor will change some of the policy priorities. And I like to believe so, and I'm gonna keep a close eye on that,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's policy, but it's also representation. And so just seeing a Black woman in power
Oh, yeah.
in a city like Detroit, it'll be really interesting to just watch this. I'm excited about it. I'm excited for um, Michigan, really. We have a lot of women in power, and I
Oh, yeah,
think
we're an all women-led state right now. Hopefully,
we
that
still have our
stays.
issues. Yeah, we still have our issues, right? It's not a
Well, it's never gonna
panacea,
be.
right? But
Yeah, but it
yeah.
also takes, yeah, of course, and, nothing's ever gonna be perfect, but, I think we've come a long way as a state, since 2018, but we have a long way to go, and part of, that is the education funding. But I think, like, Deanne's work is so important because talk about representation, and so, but talking about feeling like your vote matters, right?
Mhm.
And there is a feeling of, like, doesn't matter who wins, often there's that feeling. Not always, but often I see
Yeah.
that, hear that. It doesn't matter who wins, it still doesn't make my life, like, move forward. I
Yeah.
personally am not progressing. And, like, they have to figure out, how do they pay all these bills? How are they gonna live, right? How are they gonna take care of their children? So, um, yeah,
Well, and when she said that, a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't do politics," but you know what? Politics does you.
it absolutely does.
Yeah. And I grew up in a household where my parents were like, if you don't vote, you can't complain. And I'm like, well, I want to be able to complain, but I'm going to vote. But I mean, it it was interesting to me, like, the barriers to voting are part of this conversation too, right? So the voting laws have changed recently in Michigan, and I've seen this. So I have three sons. They're 22 and 20 and 17. And the laws have changed in those short years from when my oldest son could vote. Well, now my 17-year-old just got a notice saying that he's pre-registered to vote um, when he got his driver's license.
Yeah.
And so, I've been helping out at the schools doing voter registrations. Maybe it's not so necessary in all the schools to do it, but it did make me think, if you're not getting your driver's license, you're not pre-registered.
Yep.
And
It's true.
so we can't rely on the connection between registering to vote and a driver's license, because that is a barrier that affects a lot of people with disabilities. Like, I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons why people wouldn't get a license, or have access to a passport. God, you change your name when you get married and suddenly it's hard to vote. What are we doing? I mean, I know what we're doing. They're making it harder to vote.
Right. And the next step though is if you do, people do register but that doesn't mean they turn out to vote. And some of the same
Yes.
barriers exist, like transportation, like thinking they need an ID, which isn't necessarily the case. I know they ask for an ID, but they can vote with I forgot what it's called. They can sign that piece of paper and vote. But the polls will ask for your ID. So sometimes people will think that they absolutely need one and then maybe they don't vote because they didn't, have their ID on them or something. So yeah, there's many barriers in the system. Also, like sometimes in some of these neighborhoods, like I mean, I've worked at polls in Detroit before. Very different experience. I mean, than polls out in the suburbs. Like the lines are much longer. The one that I happen to work at, there wasn't enough parking. People were coming in and they couldn't park their car. They were driving
Mm,
in circles looking for a parking spot. So there's all kinds of weird little barriers that can happen, and
interesting.
um, I think that I know a lot of these groups that she's talking about like work on those issues, but it's not as simple as some people want to make it out to be, right? Like it's a very there's a lot to look at there, and we need to be more like thinking in the whole system when we're talking about
Yes.
these issues,
Yeah,
and
because
not
we
just
see it from
oh
our narrow lens, right?
right,
Like, well,
right,
to me, I don't have very many barriers to voting. Um,
exactly.
and I wonder too, like, a lot of this stuff you can do online. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
of course you
Well,
need a
now,
computer and a stable internet connection, but you could register
yeah.
to vote, and then you can request an absentee ballot. Um,
Right,
so
that's a and
yeah,
that's relatively that's newer, that,
yeah,
no
for sure.
reason, absentee, so but that is definitely, I would think, a help, and maybe it even helps with the lines, but again, your point, internet isn't always available for people either, so
Yeah. We need to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. But I appreciate the work that Deanne's doing.
it was an absolutely wonderful discussion with Deanne. I'm very happy that I can count her as a new friend because
Yes,
we're both Pisces, so that was cool. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense."
that's funny.
Yeah, it was wonderful, and
Just sharing a bit of her world, and really thankful that she found us and that we were able to have this conversation. So I also like to thank our audience for being with us. We really appreciate you and your time. And like always, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all the things, right, Lisa?
right, all the things.
All the things. And welcome to the matriarchy.
Welcome to our community.